It was somewhere around 2 a.m., I reckon. The rain, if anything, had intensified. Visibility was down to maybe 50 feet in front of the bullnose of my Peterbilt. That's when I first saw it. Or rather, thought I saw it. A flicker of movement on the shoulder of the road, just at the edge of my headlight beam. Small. Too small to be a deer, too quick for a person just standing there. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Probably just a trick of the rain, the way the water distorts things. You see a lot of phantoms out on these long, dark halls. Your mind starts playing tricks on you after a while. But then, a few minutes later, it happened again. This time, clearer. It was a figure, hunched over right by the ditch. It looked wrong. Not just someone caught in the rain. The proportions were off. Longish limbs. A strange, almost jerky way it moved as it seemed to be scrambling back from the roadside, away from my approaching lights. I slowed down a little, a knot tightening in my gut. You hear stories. People broken down, needing help. But this thing, it didn't look like it needed help. It looked like it was trying to avoid being seen. As I got closer, the rain seemed to part for just a split second, illuminated by my high beams. It was facing away from me, but I could see it was gaunt, impossibly thin, dressed in what looked like tattered dark rags that clung to its frame. And it was digging, clawing at the muddy embankment with long, pale fingers. The image was seared into my brain in that brief instant, the stark white of its hands against the black, wet earth. My first instinct, believe it or not, was concern. Maybe someone was in a wreck, disoriented. I flicked my lights, thinking of pulling over. But then, it stopped digging. It froze. And slowly, ever so slowly, it began to turn its head. I couldn't see a face. Not clearly. The rain was too heavy again, and the angle was wrong. But I saw enough. Enough to know that whatever it wasn't normal. There was a dark hollow where a face should be. Or maybe it was just the shadows playing tricks, but it felt predatory. It felt ancient and wrong. My foot, which had been easing off the accelerator, slammed down hard. The engine roared in protest, and I swerved slightly to give the figure a wide berth, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't dare look in my mirrors. Not right away. I just drove, faster than I should have in that weather. The rain was a torrent, the wipers fighting a losing battle. After a few miles, when the adrenaline had started to recede, just a fraction, replaced by a cold, creeping dread, I chanced a glance. The mirrors were just sheets of distorted, rain-streaked darkness. Nothing. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me giddy. Just a vagrant, I told myself. Or some poor soul who'd lost their way, made strange by the storm and the darkness. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. It clung to me, heavy and suffocating, like the humid air in the cab. The rain continued its assault. Another hour passed, or maybe it was 2. Time gets elastic on those nights. I was starting to tell myself I'd imagined the worst of it. Stress, fatigue, they can paint some pretty vivid pictures. Then the CB radio crackled. Static, mostly. Not unusual in a storm this bad. But then, through the hiss and pop, a sound. A whisper. Faint. So faint I thought I was imagining it. But Thomas's. My blood went cold. Absolutely, icily cold. It was my name, no doubt about it. Drawn out, sibilant, like the rustle of dry leaves or like dirt falling on a coffin lid. I grabbed the mic, my hand shaking. "Who is this?" I barked, trying to sound tougher than I felt. "Identify yourself," only static answered. Then, a few moments later, the whisper came again. A little clearer this time, as if it was right beside me in the cab. Hungry. It wasn't just a word. It was a feeling. A raw, gnawing emptiness that seemed to emanate from the radio, from the very air around me. I felt a primal fear, the kind that bypasses thought and goes straight for the survival instincts. I reached over and switched the CB off. Completely off. But the silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was worse. It was a listening silence. The rain hammered down. The wipers kept their rhythm. Slap, 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 slap. And then I heard it. Not from the radio this time. From behind me. From the sleeper berth. A soft, dragging sound. Like something wet and heavy being pulled across the fabric. I didn't want to look. Every cell in my body screamed at me not to look. Keep your eyes on the road, Thomas. Just keep driving. Don't look back. But it was like an invisible force was compelling me. Slowly, my gaze drifted to the rearview mirror that showed the interior of the cab. In the dim, flickering light from the dashboard, I saw it. A shape, huddled in the corner of the sleeper, dark, wet, and those hands. Those long, pale, claw-like hands resting on the edge of the bunk. It was the thing from the roadside. How? How in God's name had it gotten into my truck? The doors were locked. The windows were up. It didn't move. It just sat there, and I could feel it watching me. I could feel its hunger. It was a palpable thing, a cold pressure in the cab. I could smell it too now, a damp, earthy scent, like freshly turned grave soil, but with something else underneath, something rotten. I think I started to pray, just mumbling, incoherent words. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was afraid if I made any sudden moves, it would react. The road ahead was a blur of rain and fear. Miles stretched into an eternity. Each rumble of thunder sounded like a death knell. Then the whispering started again. Not from the radio, not from the back, but from all around me. Software insistent. So cold, so alone. Thomas, let me in. But it was in. It was right there. Unless what I saw in the mirror wasn't the source. Unless the whisper wasn't coming from it. The feeling of dread intensified, twisting into a sickening knot of terror. The rain seemed to be whispering now too. The wind howled its name. The truck itself felt like it was complicit, a rolling coffin. I don't know how long I drove like that, with that thing in my sleeper and the whispers in my ears. It felt like an eternity. I remember seeing the first faint glow of dawn in the eastern sky, the rain starting to ease just a little, and as the light began to filter into the cab, making the shadows recede, the presence, it started to fade. The dragging sound came again, softer this time. I risked a glance in the mirror. The shape was still there, but it seemed less substantial, more like a shadow itself. The earthy smell was fainter. The whispers died down, replaced by the steady drone of the engine and the slowing rhythm of the wipers. By the time the sun had fully risen, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, the rain had stopped. The world looked washed clean, and the sleeper berth was empty. There was nothing there, no sign that anything or anyone had been there at all, except for one thing. On the mattress, where the figure had been huddled, was a small patch of damp black earth, and a single long, pale strand that looked disturbingly like a root or perhaps a desiccated finger bone. I pulled over at the first truck stop I came to, my body shaking uncontrollably. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. I didn't sleep for 2 days, and I never drove Route 77 at night again, not if I could help it. Some people say it was just road fatigue, a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion and the storm, maybe. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. And sometimes when the rain is particularly heavy and I'm alone in the quiet of my cab, I can still hear that whisper, just at the edge of hearing. Thomas, hungry. It's a reminder that some things that wander the lonely roads on stormy nights aren't looking for shelter. They're looking for something else entirely, and you pray you're not the one they find. My Aunt Carol and Uncle Mike's house was one of those big 2-story places built in the early 50s. Lots of character, they called it, which, as I quickly learned, was code for lots of strange noises, drafty windows, and a basement that looked like something out of a horror movie. Still, when they asked me to house sit for a week while they went on an anniversary cruise, I jumped at the chance. Free food, quiet place to study for my midterms. What could go wrong? The first few days were fine, peaceful even. I got into a rhythm, study, watch some TV, explore the slightly creepy collection of porcelain dolls Aunt Carol had in the spare bedroom. Classic old house stuff. Then came Thursday. The forecast had been predicting a big storm system moving through, and by late afternoon, the sky started to look bruised and angry. The wind picked up, and soon, the first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the windows. By evening, it was a full-blown deluge, the kind of rain that makes you glad to be inside, even if inside was a slightly spooky old house. I made myself some tea, curled up on the sofa in the living room with my psychology textbook, and tried to focus. But the storm was a constant distraction. The wind howled around the eaves. Branches scraped against the siding, and every now and then, a particularly loud clap of thunder would make the whole house vibrate. It was around 10 o'clock when I first heard it. The drip, 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 drip. It was faint at first, barely audible over the storm. I paused my reading, listening. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the kitchen. Probably just a leaky faucet, I figured. Aunt Carol had mentioned the plumbing was a bit temperamental. I made a mental note to check it before bed and went back to my book. But the dripping sound, it didn't go away. If anything, it got a little louder, a little more insistent. Drip, drip, drip. It started to get under my skin, that rhythmic, monotonous sound, like a tiny, persistent hammer tapping away at my nerves. After another 20 minutes of trying and failing to ignore it, I sighed, put down my book, and headed towards the kitchen. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning that briefly illuminated the counters and appliances. The main kitchen faucet was bone dry. I checked the small sink in the utility room off the kitchen. Also dry. I stood there, listening. Drip, drip, drip. It was definitely louder in the kitchen, but where was it coming from? I looked up. The ceiling. Could there be a leak from the upstairs bathroom? The thought filled me with a minor sense of dread. Dealing with a leaky roof in this storm was not on my agenda. I flicked on the kitchen light, scanning the ceiling. No water stains. No obvious signs of a leak, but the sound persisted. Drip, drip, drip. It seemed to be coming from inside the walls, or maybe from the floor above, but muffled. I decided to check the upstairs bathroom, the one directly above the kitchen. The light in the hallway upstairs was flickering erratically, which didn't do much for my already fraying nerves. The bathroom itself was small and a bit dated. I checked the sink faucet, the shower head, the toilet. Nothing. Everything was dry. No telltale puddles on the floor. I stood in the bathroom doorway, listening intently. The dripping sound was fainter here. So, it wasn't coming from the bathroom directly. It was stronger downstairs, in the kitchen. I was starting to feel a little like I was going crazy, chasing a sound that seemed to move. Back downstairs, I went. The living room felt a little less cozy now. The storm outside seemed to mirror the growing unease inside me. I tried to settle back on the sofa, but the dripping was impossible to ignore. It was like it was calling to me. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop seemed to land with a little more weight, a little more significance. I muted the TV. Silence, apart from the storm and that relentless drip. I walked slowly around the kitchen, my head tilted, trying to pinpoint the source. It seemed strongest near the pantry, a narrow door set into the far wall. The pantry was more of a deep cupboard, really. I rarely went in there. Aunt Carol kept mostly canned goods and seldom used appliances on its deep shelves. With a sigh, I pulled open the pantry door. It was dark inside. I fumbled for a light switch but couldn't find one. Strange, I thought most pantries had a light. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight, shining it into the space. Shelves laden with cans, jars, old Tupperware, cobwebs in the corners, and at the very back on the floor, a small dark puddle was forming. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was definitely coming from here, from above the puddle. I shone my light upwards. The ceiling of the pantry, which was directly beneath the upstairs hallway, not the bathroom, looked intact. But then I saw it, a dark, discolored patch on the wooden shelf just above the puddle. And from the edge of that patch, a single drop of water was forming, swelling, and then falling with a soft plink into the puddle below. Okay, a leak. Not ideal, but at least I'd found it. I'd put a bucket under it and call Aunt Carol in the morning. Mystery solved. I reached for an old ice cream tub on a lower shelf to catch the water. As I moved some jars out of the way, my fingers brushed against the back wall of the pantry. It felt odd, not like the plasterboard of the other walls. It was slightly soft, almost yielding, and it was damp. Curiosity, or maybe just a growing sense of unease, made me press a little harder. The surface gave way with a faint squelching sound. My phone light wavered. What in the world? I pushed again, and a small section of what looked like rotting wallpaper or a very thin layer of plaster crumbled inwards, revealing darkness behind it. And the smell. Oh God, the smell that wafted out. It was vile, sweetish like rotten fruit, but with an underlying metallic, coppery tang, and something else, something uniquely fleshy. My stomach churned. The dripping sound was clearer now, coming from that newly exposed opening. Drip, drip, drip. It wasn't just water, it was thicker, darker. My hand was trembling as I angled the phone light into the hole. It wasn't a large opening, maybe a few inches across. What I saw in that narrow beam of light made my blood run cold. It wasn't pipes, it wasn't insulation, it was something glistening, something pale and veined, and the drips were coming from it. Slow, viscous drops of dark, reddish-brown liquid. It looked like exposed tissue, like the inside of something. I stumbled back out of the pantry, nearly tripping over my own feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The smell clung to me, to my clothes. I slammed the pantry door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This wasn't a leak. This was something else, something horrible. My mind raced. What was behind that wall? The house was old, yes, but this was beyond anything I could comprehend. Had an animal gotten trapped in the walls and died? But that didn't explain the sheer volume of the dripping or the way the wall felt. The dripping sound, even muffled by the closed pantry door, seemed louder now. Mocking. Drip, drip, drip. I had to get out. I wasn't staying in that house another minute. I fumbled for my keys, my jacket. The storm was still raging outside, but I didn't care. Anywhere was better than here. As I reached the front door, my hand on the doorknob, I heard another sound. A floorboard creaking, upstairs. I froze. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mike were thousands of miles away, on a cruise ship. There was no one else supposed to be in the house. The creak came again, slower this time, deliberate, from the hallway directly above the kitchen, directly above the pantry. My blood turned to ice. The dripping sound from the kitchen seemed to sync up with a new, horrifying thought. What if the leak wasn't just a leak? What if the house itself was alive? Or if something inside it was? Then, another sound. A soft, wet, dragging noise, coming from the top of the stairs. I didn't wait. I threw open the front door and ran out into the blinding rain, into the howling wind. I didn't look back. I just ran, my lungs burning, the horrible, sweet, rotten smell still filling my nostrils, the sound of the dripping forever seared into my memory. I ran to the nearest neighbor's house, hammered on their door until a bewildered Mr. Henderson opened it. I must have looked like a madwoman, soaked to the bone, babbling about drips and smells and something in the walls. The police were called. They went into the house. I refused to go back in, stayed shivering in the Hendersons' kitchen, wrapped in a blanket. After what felt like an eternity, an officer came back. He looked pale. He said they'd found the source of the leak. He wouldn't tell me exactly what it was. Structural issues, he said, and a severe pest problem that got out of hand. But the way he said it, the look in his eyes, told me it was more than just rats. Way more. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mike had to cut their cruise short. They never told me the full story either, just that the house needed extensive repairs and that they'd be staying in a hotel for a while. They sold it a few months later. Got a surprisingly low price considering the market. I never asked for more details. I didn't want to know. Sometimes not knowing is better, but I can still hear that drip sometimes, especially when it rains. Drip, 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 and I can still smell that awful, cloying sweetness. It reminds me that even in the most ordinary of places, beneath the surface of everyday life, unimaginable horrors can be festering, waiting for a rainy night to make themselves known. And sometimes, the sounds an old house makes aren't just the house settling. Sometimes, it's something else entirely. Something that's been feeding and growing. Blackwood Cemetery. It's been standing for close to 200 years, generations laid to rest under its ancient oaks and weeping willows. I was the head groundskeeper there for the better part of 30 years. Knew every stone, every mausoleum, every dip and rise in the land like the back of my hand. Most folks find cemeteries creepy, especially after dark. But for me, it was always quiet, peaceful even, a place of final rest. The dead, they're not the ones you usually have to worry about. It's the living that cause the trouble. or so I believed, for the longest time. This particular night, oh, it must have been 15, maybe 20 years ago now. November. A real beast of a storm blew in. Started in the late afternoon with a low gray sky and a biting wind, and by nightfall, the heavens just opened up. Rain coming down so hard it felt like solid water, driven by gusts that made the old trees groan and sway like tormented spirits. Not the kind of night you'd want to be out in, let alone in a cemetery. But one of the main storm drains near the oldest section, by the Blackwood family mausoleum, had a tendency to clog with leaves and debris. If it backed up, it could flood a good portion of the lower grounds, and even threaten some of the older, more fragile grave sites. So, bundled up in my heaviest slicker and armed with a powerful flashlight and a long clearing rod, I headed out into the tempest. My little office and workshop were near the main gates, but the Blackwood Mausoleum was a fair trek, right at the far western edge of the grounds, bordered by a dense, unkempt wood. The walk was an ordeal. The wind tore at me, trying to rip the hood from my head. Rain lashed my face, cold and stinging. My flashlight beam cut a shaky path through the darkness, illuminating rows of slick, wet headstones, their inscriptions blurred by the downpour. The only sounds were the roar of the storm and the squelch of my boots on the sodden ground. It felt like I was the only soul alive in the entire world. I finally reached the Blackwood Mausoleum. It's an imposing structure, granite and marble, with heavy bronze doors and a small, barred window on each side. Old Man Blackwood, the timber baron who founded the town, was laid to rest in there, along with several generations of his family. It always had a bit of a somber air about it, even on sunny days. That night, in the heart of the storm, it looked downright malevolent. The drain was, as I suspected, completely choked. Leaves, twigs, all sorts of muck washed down from the wooded hillside. I got to work with the rod, plunging it into the grate, trying to break up the blockage. It was hard, messy work. The rain was relentless, soaking through my gear despite the slicker. Every flash of lightning would briefly illuminate the cemetery in a stark, ghostly white, the monuments casting long, dancing shadows. After about 20 minutes of struggling, I finally felt the blockage give. Water started to gurgle and then whoosh down the drain with a satisfying roar. Relief. I straightened up, aching and cold, ready to head back to the warmth of my office. That's when I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. It was soft, very soft, almost lost in the noise of the storm. I froze, listening. My first thought was a branch, caught by the wind, tapping against a stone or perhaps the mausoleum itself. Tap, 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 tap. There it was again. A little more distinct this time, and it wasn't random, like a branch would be. It had a rhythm, a deliberate, hesitant rhythm, and it was coming from the direction of the mausoleum, specifically from the heavy bronze doors. I shone my flashlight beam on the doors. They were massive, probably hadn't been opened in decades. Verdigris stained the intricate carvings. No one could be opening those from the inside. It was impossible. Tap, tap, tap. A chill, colder than the November rain, snaked its way down my spine. I told myself it was the wind. It had to be the wind, playing tricks. Maybe a loose piece of metal on the door, or something caught in the carvings, rapping against the bronze in the gusts. I took a hesitant step closer, my flashlight beam trembling slightly. The rain hammered down around me. The wind howled. And then, the tapping came again, louder this time, more insistent. Tap, 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 tap. It was unmistakably coming from inside the mausoleum. My heart lodged itself somewhere in my throat. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't a branch. This was someone, or something, tapping on the inside of those ancient sealed doors. Doors that led to a tomb filled with the long dead. I should have run. Any sane person would have turned and fled back through the storm, not stopping until they were miles away. But I was rooted to the spot, partly by fear, yes, but also by a strange, morbid curiosity, and a sense of duty, perhaps. This was my cemetery. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak and thin against the roar of the storm. "Is someone in there?" Silence. Only the wind and the rain. And then, tap, 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 tap. It was weaker now, more like a flutter, but it was still there. My mind was racing, trying to find a rational explanation. A trapped animal? But how would it get in? And why would it tap like that? So deliberately. I edged closer still until I was standing just a few feet from the bronze doors. Rain streamed down their cold, metallic surface. I could smell the damp stone of the mausoleum, the wet earth, the decaying leaves. I raised my flashlight, pressing it almost against one of the small, barred windows set high in the wall beside the doors. The glass was thick, grimy, and streaked with rain, but I tried to peer inside. Darkness. Utter, impenetrable darkness. And then, from within that darkness, from the other side of that grimy window, something pale flickered, just for a second, like a hand, waving weakly in front of the glass. I recoiled as if I'd been burned, stumbling back a step. My breath hitched. I didn't see that. It was a reflection, a trick of the light and the rain on the glass. It had to be. Tap, tap. The sound was coming from the window now, fainter, right where I'd thought I'd seen the movement, as if whatever was inside knew I was looking. I felt a wave of sheer, unadulterated terror wash over me. This wasn't some prank. This wasn't a trapped animal. This was something else. Something that shouldn't be. Something that was trying to get out, or trying to get my attention. I backed away, slowly at first, then faster, my boots slipping on the wet grass. I didn't take my eyes off the mausoleum, half expecting those heavy bronze doors to creak open or that pale hand to appear again at the window. The tapping continued, fainter and fainter as I retreated, until it was finally swallowed by the overwhelming sounds of the storm. I didn't stop until I reached my office, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving. I was soaked to the bone, trembling like a leaf, but I barely noticed the cold. All I could hear was that infernal tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't sleep that night, just sat there, with the lights on, listening to the storm rage outside, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. Every gust of wind sounded like it carried that faint, desperate tapping. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun was out, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. The cemetery looked almost serene, birds singing, the grounds littered with fallen leaves and broken branches. It was hard to believe the terror of the night before had been real. Part of me wanted to dismiss it, an overactive imagination, fueled by the storm and the solitude. But I knew what I'd heard, and what I thought I'd seen. Later that morning, driven by a need to know, I went back to the Blackwood Mausoleum. In the clear light of day, it looked ordinary, just an old stone building. The ground around it was muddy, littered with storm debris. The bronze doors were closed, impassive, the barred windows dark and still. I walked around it, carefully. I examined the doors, the windows. No marks, no signs of disturbance. Nothing to indicate anything unusual had happened, except on the muddy ground, directly beneath the small window where I'd heard the tapping, where I thought I'd seen that flicker of pale movement. There were marks, not footprints, more like scratches, long, thin gouges in the soft earth, as if something had been clawing weakly at the ground from the other side of the wall, reaching out from under the base of the mausoleum. And there, mixed in with the mud and pine needles, was a tiny shard of something pale and brittle. It looked like a piece of fingernail, a very old, very fragile fingernail. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a long time. Then I backed away and left. I never told anyone what happened that night. Who would believe me? They'd say old Arthur was finally losing his marbles. But I reinforced the drain by the Blackwood Mausoleum myself, made sure it wouldn't clog so easily again. I didn't want to have to go out there during another storm. I worked at Blackwood for another 10 years after that. And many nights, when the wind was right and the rain was falling, I'd find myself listening for that faint, hesitant tapping. Sometimes I thought I could almost hear it, carried on the breeze, a desperate plea from within the cold stone. The dead are supposed to rest in peace, but sometimes I wonder, sometimes on a dark and stormy night, maybe they don't rest so peacefully. Maybe sometimes they just want someone to know they're still there, still waiting, still tapping.